I sat at the head of the table on my 70th birthday, watching my children laugh. Then my eldest son slid a glass toward me and said, "This one's special for you, Dad." His smile didn't reach his eyes. I lifted the glass. But before it touched my lips, I caught the coldest stare I'd ever seen from my own flesh and blood. My heart sank. My son wanted me gone. I kept my hand steady, masking the ache inside. But deep down I made a promise. If he thought I was blind to his game, he was in for a surprise. I'd already set things in motion he knew nothing about. What happened next tore my family apart and left the entire courtroom gasping. Stay with me until the end of this story. And comment the city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you never miss what happened after that night. The late September air in Houston carried a hint of warmth, the kind that clung to your shirt and reminded you summer wasn't quite done. The restaurant glowed with golden lights against the evening sky, polished windows reflecting a scene that should have been joyful. Walking toward the entrance, there was a weight that wasn't just from age. Birthdays had a way of reminding a man how much had been lost. Without her, without my wife, these gatherings felt hollow before they even began. Inside. The sound of clinking glasses and cheerful chatter surrounded me. Trenton, my eldest, greeted me with the broad smile of a host who owned the place, though the table was reserved under my name. His arm came around my shoulders, firm, guiding, but it carried more performance than affection. He spoke loudly so everyone could hear. "Dad's here, finally." The laugh that followed sounded rehearsed, like lines in a play. The others chimed in with pleasantries, one after another, like greetings exchanged at a neighbor's funeral. Faces bent into smiles, but their eyes betrayed a different script. Hollow warmth. Every handshake. Every "how have you been?" hung in the air too light, too brittle. And Trenton, always at the center, cast those smiles like coins to a crowd. I was steered to the far end of the long table. "It's quieter here, Dad," Trenton said, with that same practiced grin. The seat was away from the main conversation, half-shadowed by a pillar. I opened my mouth to protest, but his hand pressed down gently on my shoulder, and his words cut off mine. "Trust me, you'll be comfortable here." Comfortable? It felt like exile. The others slid into their seats without a thought, their laughter growing louder the farther down the table I looked. The leather cushion swallowed me as I sat, a spectator in what was meant to be my celebration. Memories tugged at me. Birthdays passed. When she would bake a cake. When the children would clamor for a slice before the candles cooled. Back then, the table had been round. No one at the head, no one pushed aside. Now, it stretched long and narrow, and I was placed where I could be ignored without guilt. The meal began, conversations rising and falling like tides that never reached my shore. Trenton dominated, as if the evening belonged to him. Every toast, every story was steered his way. My voice, when it tried to join, was met with polite nods, quickly drowned beneath the next loud laugh. Yet in the gaps between words, I caught glances, sharp and quick, passing across the table. There was something just beneath the surface, something waiting. A glass of water sat in front of me, clear and ordinary. I lifted it slowly, the cool condensation running down my hand. When my eyes met Trenton's across the length of the table, his smile faltered for a heartbeat. In its place flashed something colder, sharper, a warning hidden behind the warmth. The glass lingered near my lips, the unease in my chest whispering that this night carried more than hollow laughter. The glass looked harmless in the lamplight, a ruby halo pooled beneath the rim. Laughter skated along the table like loose change, bright and empty. The unease from a moment ago hadn't budged. It settled behind the ribs the way a summer storm sits over the Gulf, waiting for its moment. A waiter in a crisp apron set the glass by my plate. "From the bar," he said. Compliments. He was young and careful, eyes flicking toward Trenton and back. My oldest leaned into the role of host again, fingers spread on the white tablecloth as if he owned the night. "It's a Cabernet you like," he announced. A special pour? For Dad? The word lodged. He hadn't called me Dad with warmth in years. Tonight it sounded like something chipped out of stone. Water is fine, I said, a smile to soften it. The waiter hesitated. Trenton didn't. He'll try it, my son said. And the boy retreated like a tide pulled by a hard moon. The stem felt colder than it should. Years teach a man to notice small things. An extra place card that moves. The change in a voice when money is near. A silence that is too complete. The wine had a sweetness in the air that didn't suit the bottle, he claimed. Maybe the cork had been open too long. Maybe the bar kept a heavy hand. Maybe... Trenton watched, not the casual glance of a son pleased to spoil his father, but the narrow-eyed look of a contractor inspecting a seam he needs to hold. His lips arranged themselves into a party smile that never reached his gaze. Somewhere. A busser dropped a tray, and the noise burst like a firecracker. Conversation paused, then resumed, louder, as if volume could fix distance. "Let's do this, right?" He lifted his own glass, standing just enough to command attention. "To the man who taught us to work with our hands and keep our word." The family echoed him. The pretty chorus of a life we used to live. In the candlelight. All those glasses chimed together. Mine rose late. The clink reached me as a faint tap, like a spoon on a coffin lid. I didn't sip. Tilted the bowl instead. Let the light play through it while the table cheered for something that looked like love. Someone down the line, an in-law with a laugh too ready, said I looked nervous. It came with a ripple of amusement, a polite little wave that ran the length of the table and broke on my chair. My hand had started a small tremor. It hid itself under the napkin. Old reflex, like a bird tucking its head under a wing. "Come on, Dad," Trenton coaxed, the voice people use for guests who don't get the game. "Just a taste." He was smiling for the room, palms open, generous. The scent rose again, sweet and wrong, back when your mother was alive. A glass meant peace, a porch with creaking boards, cicadas tuning up, a bowl of stew cooling under her dish towel. This one felt like a dare. Patience can be mistaken for weakness. I let that mistake do some work for me. Air thinned, patience hardened, brought the rim near, close enough to fog the glass with breath. Paused. Lowered it. "Temperature's off," I said. "Feels warm." It wasn't, not especially. But the remark gave me a little time. A waiter appeared as if conjured by the table's attention. "Would you like a fresh one, sir?" Trenton's answer leapt in front of mine. "He'll keep that," he said brightly. "Dad's picky about good wine. Let him enjoy this." His eyes on me again, measuring, almost counting. A son knows the fault lines in his father's face. He was adding them up, waiting for one to crack. Pride, stubbornness, age. He had a wager with himself about which would snap first. I set the glass down. The base kissed the tablecloth with a soft, wet ring. A niece asked about old fishing stories, and the table leaned that way, grateful for safer water. The story came out of me on rails, trimmed and polished by repetition, but my attention stayed on the wine. Just beneath the fruit, something medicinal ghosted the rim. It might have been the cleaner from the bar. It might have been nothing at all. It might have been the thought of my son's eyes. Another toast. I lifted water this time. And a cousin raised a brow, as if I'd broken dress code. Trenton squeezed a shoulder as he passed behind my chair. A touch light as a moth. "You okay?" he murmured. "Long day?" The question had the shape of care and the weight of a test. "Long year," I said, and let it hang. The laughter grew softer as courses arrived. I traced the napkin's hem, felt threads that had been pulled and knotted. Across the room, a woman helped her father into a chair. Steady and practiced. Small mercies, performed without speech. That used to be our normal. Tonight everything felt performed. He raised his glass again. "One more," he said. And the table indulged him. A birthday has rules, and my son had appointed himself master of ceremonies. To 70 years. He looked at me, and the number tilted. What I saw in his gaze wasn't celebration, but schedule. An elder becomes a set of dates to some people. When the house transfers, when the truck is retitled, when the bank calls you sir in a different tone, when the clinking finished. I brought the wine close a final time. As an actor might bring a prop to his lips so the back row believes, the smell told the truth the taste never would. The glass hovered, a small moon over a dangerous tide. If I drink this, I breathed into the space between us, the words almost too soft for sound. I may not leave this table alive. The laughter around the table thinned for just a moment, as if the air itself needed to rest. That was when a younger voice slipped in under the noise. A nephew, his name barely caught in the shuffle of plates, leaned close enough for only me to hear. His whisper brushed against my ear. "Don't drink that?" Every muscle in my body went tight. The glass still sat in front of me, its rim catching the glow of the chandelier above. I didn't move, didn't breathe for a beat. The uneasy instinct that had lingered since the waiter placed it down now found its proof. It wasn't paranoia. It was warning. I swallowed hard, disguising the motion with a faint smile. My eyes roamed the table, careful not to rest too long on anyone. Trenton was busy steering the conversation back toward himself, his voice filling the room like he owned it. The others laughed on cue, nodding at his stories, while I sat there with the truth pressing down on me heavier than the weight of age. Inside, alarm bells clanged. Outwardly, I stayed stone still, the practiced calm of a man who's had to hide his pain more than once in his life. The evening pressed on. Trenton's words drowned out mine, as if the whole dinner was a stage for him alone. He joked, recalled half-true stories, raised his glass again and again, making sure all eyes were on him. Mine, it seemed, no longer mattered. The silence I carried was not weakness. It sharpened me. Every word, ignored. Every smile, withheld. Carved deeper into my awareness. They thought me invisible, irrelevant. They mistook my stillness for surrender. But in that quiet, my focus narrowed. Their dismissal gave me time to notice what mattered. The smirk at the corner of Trenton's mouth. The way his hand lingered too long on that glass he wanted me to drink. The tension in the room that wasn't just about celebration. Then, with exaggerated flourish, Trenton pushed a gift bag toward me. "Happy birthday, Dad. We thought you'd like this." The room leaned forward with expectation. My hand slipped inside the bag and pulled out a glossy brochure. Smiling faces of strangers. Sunset Pines Retirement Community. Written in cheerful letters across the front, the laughter came. Quick and awkward. "It's just a joke," someone said. But the sound was thin, brittle. I forced a smile, thin enough to split. The paper cut deeper than any blade could. My fingers tightened around the edges, but I said nothing. I let the laughter roll past me, let it echo and fade. Because in that gift, I saw more than mockery. I saw intention, a plan to move me aside, to make room for someone else at the center. Memories welled uninvited, past birthdays, when my late wife sat by my side, when gifts carried thought and meaning, when my children's eyes shone with something real. Back then, the wrapping wasn't just paper. It was love folded into a box. Now, all I held was proof that love had been replaced with calculation. The bitter contrast hollowed me out, leaving only suspicion in its place. I slid the brochure beneath my chair, hiding it as if it were something obscene. My lips stayed sealed, my face unreadable, but my mind churned. Trenton leaned back, watching me with that same smirk that had started to feel less like confidence and more like a warning. He thought he'd humiliated me. He thought I'd sit there quietly, taking it like a relic too tired to fight. But the truth hardened inside me. That smile wasn't the end of a joke. It was the start of a plan. He wasn't just mocking me. He was preparing to erase me. And if this was how boldly they could insult me in the open, what shadows were they moving in behind my back? The thought chilled me to the bone. If this is how they treat me in the open, what are they plotting in secret. Trenton rose from his chair with a broad grin plastered across his face. The kind of grin meant to charm the whole table, but sharp enough to cut me where I sat. He clinked his glass with a spoon, calling for attention like a master of ceremonies. "Everyone, raise your glasses for my father's birthday," he declared, his voice booming above the chatter. The family obeyed almost instantly, their glasses lifted high, eyes darting to me as though I were the star of a show I had never agreed to perform in. The spotlight settled on me. Heavy and unwanted, my glass sat before me, the red liquid shimmering under the dim restaurant lights. I lifted it with deliberate slowness, my hand steady, though my heart was anything but. His eyes met mine across the table, unblinking, demanding. He wanted me to drink. He needed to see it. I raised the glass toward my lips, tilting it just enough to wet them. The wine touched but did not pass beyond. A chill slid down my spine as I felt his gaze locked on me like a predator waiting for its prey to stumble. I held the liquid in my mouth for a breath, then let it settle back without swallowing. My smile stayed thin, polite, practiced. The moment stretched far too long. A cheer erupted as glasses clinked, laughter rising around me. But all I felt was the weight of his stare, my own son, waiting to confirm my surrender to that poisoned toast. Fear and disbelief twisted together inside me, sharp and undeniable. Then chaos gave me an unexpected gift. Plates shifted, chairs scraped, and in the muddle of reaching arms, Trenton set his glass down too close to mine. A moment later, he grabbed it again, not realizing the switch he had made in his own haste. I saw it, clear as day, and yet my face remained impassive, my lips sealed. He lifted the wrong glass to his lips, smiling wide, proud of the toast he had forced. My pulse quickened. His arrogance, his certainty, blinded him to the danger of his own trap. I did not speak, did not flinch, only watched. In that instant, every piece snapped into place. The false warmth at the start of the evening, the humiliation of my seat, the strange drink placed before me. It was never just family tradition. It was an execution wrapped in pleasantries. My own son, my blood, had set the stage to erase me at my birthday dinner. Grief pressed into my chest, heavier than the years already weighing down my bones. Rage followed, sharp and hot, though I forced it beneath the surface. What father imagines his child plotting such an end? What man prepares himself for betrayal so intimate, so deliberate? I set my glass aside with careful calm, resting it beyond the reach of my hand. My face betrayed nothing but faint amusement, as though the toast had been a harmless bit of ceremony. Across the table, Trenton smirked, the expression of a man who believed he was already victorious. Inside, a different voice stirred. If I revealed him now, the family would laugh it off, dismiss it as paranoia, accuse me of seeing shadows where none existed. They would choose the youth, the confidence, the performance he offered over the quiet warnings of an aging father. But if I waited too long, if I gave him room, there might not be another chance. The thought dug into me like a thorn. This was no longer about a single glass of wine. It was about survival, about reclaiming the respect and place he was so eager to bury. I leaned back in my chair, forcing a calm I did not feel. Inside, the words whispered. I have to outsmart him before he makes another move. The room never truly settled after the toast. Laughter came in uneven bursts, brittle and nervous, bouncing off the polished wood and glass of the restaurant walls. Every time my eyes drifted to Trenton, he was already watching me, that smirk of his twitching at the corners like a secret only he enjoyed. The food arrived, but the air was thicker than the aroma of steak and garlic butter. Forks clinked against plates, yet it all felt forced, staged, like everyone was trying to pretend nothing had happened. The weight of the untouched wine glass lingered beside me. My hand hovered near it now and then, just to remind him I hadn't forgotten. He wanted me to drink. He wanted me to trust. And he wanted me gone. I leaned forward, voice barely audible over the chatter. Be careful what you serve, son. Some poisons have a way of circling back. His fork froze midair. For a split second, the mask slipped. Fear flickered in his eyes before arrogance replaced it. He straightened, chuckled, and shook his head as if I had cracked a poor joke. But his knuckles tightened around the silverware, and his jaw flexed hard enough to grind his teeth. "Dad, you always were dramatic," he muttered. The words carried farther than he meant. A cousin down the table cocked an eyebrow. My youngest daughter set her fork down and studied us with unease. Whispers stirred, moving faster than the waiters weaving between tables. "What's going on?" someone finally asked. Half serious, half worried, Trenton waved a dismissive hand, smirking. "Nothing, just the old man trying out some dark humor." But I didn't smile. I didn't blink. My silence was louder than any words. Doubt slithered into the family's faces, shadows creeping across what had begun as a celebration. I cleared my throat and raised my voice just enough to command the table. "I have carried this family for decades, paid for schools, homes, second chances. I will not—" I tapped the edge of my plate, slow and deliberate. "Be made a fool at my own table." The chatter collapsed into silence. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to hush. Trenton leaned back, smirk intact. But it faltered against the weight of my stare. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. My words held more power than his false cheer. The silence stretched until it cracked. Plates scraped, glasses shifted. The family's eyes darted between us, suspicion taking root. For the first time, they looked at him the way I had been forced to for months. Trenton leaned closer, lips barely moving. "You won't see what's coming, old man." A chill rolled through me, but I didn't flinch. Inside, something steeled. If this was war, I would fight it on my own terms. He thought he could corner me. But he had underestimated the patience of an old man who had survived grief deeper than he could ever imagine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The echo of his words still rang in my ears long after the plates were cleared away and the laughter died down. "You won't see what's coming, old man." It was more than a threat. It was a declaration of war. For days, I carried that sentence like a stone in my chest, unable to shake the unease. This wasn't just about a drink slipped across the table. It wasn't even about humiliation. It was about control over my life, my home, and everything I had worked to build. The silence of my house in Houston, once a comfort after my wife's passing, became a stage for restless thoughts. Every creak of the wood floor, every rustle of leaves outside my window fed the suspicion that my own son was moving against me in ways I hadn't yet seen. I told myself to stay sharp, to look beyond the surface, to be the man who had survived worse storms in his life. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The call arrived mid-morning, when the Texas sun was already climbing high. It was the bank manager, an old acquaintance who spoke with the careful tone of someone treading on dangerous ground. "Mr. Riker," he said, "we received a transfer request yesterday. Rather unusual. Documents authorizing the movement of your property assets." My breath caught. "Property assets," I repeated, though I knew exactly what he meant. My land, my house, the very roof under which I raised my children. "Yes, sir. And it bears your signature. But it didn't sit right with me. Something about the way it was processed." I asked him to fax the documents immediately. When I spread the papers out on my kitchen table, the sight nearly buckled my knees. The handwriting, clumsy, but practiced, my name forged in ink as though I were already gone. And beneath it, as bold as betrayal itself, the counter-signature, Trenton Riker. The room spun. The son I had once carried on my shoulders, the boy I had trusted with my tools and my secrets, now plotting to strip me of everything. The poison at dinner was no fluke, no twisted joke. It was part of a larger design to erase me. I didn't sit idle. The shock gave way to resolve. I gathered the forged papers, tucked them into a manila folder, and drove to meet Gregory. An old friend from my working days who had always possessed more caution than I did. Gregory's brow furrowed deep as canyons when I spread the papers across his desk. You need a lawyer, Lemuel. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. This is criminal, the word stung. Not because of its weight, but because of the face tied to it. My son. I know what it means, I said quietly. But to drag him into court, it'll tear the family in two. Gregory leaned forward, his voice steady. Better torn apart by truth than held together by lies. His words sank deep. I thought of my wife, how she believed family was sacred. Yet, what kind of family lets a son poison his father, forge his name, and steal his home? The answer was clear. One built on lies, already broken. That evening, I invited Trenton over under the guise of casual dinner. The family gathered once more. Though the air between us was sharper than barbed wire, I waited until the meal was underway, then slid the folder onto the table, my hand resting on it. Funny thing, I said evenly. My bank called me this morning. Seems someone's been busy moving property around. Trenton's eyes flickered, just a second too long before he barked a laugh. Dad, are you serious? You think I'd do something like that? Maybe you've been confused lately? The words hung heavy, an accusation in disguise, a challenge to my clarity, to my very mind. He wanted them to think I was slipping, the senile old man imagining monsters and shadows. But I didn't waver. I met his stare, calm as stone. Confused or not, I keep my records. In these, I tapped the folder. Don't lie. The room went silent. My other children glanced back and forth, doubt flickering in their eyes. Whispers began, not loud enough to hear, but enough to fracture the air. Trenton's smirk returned, painted with arrogance, but his knuckles whitened where they gripped the table. That night, I locked the folder away in my desk. My hand lingered on the key, knowing the fight had only begun. Sleep came reluctantly, the kind filled with restless shadows. Somewhere past midnight, a faint scrape of wood pulled me awake. At first, I thought it was the wind against the shutters, but then came the unmistakable sound of drawers sliding open, heart pounding. I rose quietly and stepped into the hallway. The study door stood ajar, light spilling from within. I pushed it open just enough to see the desk, my desk, wide open. The manila folder gone. I entered fully, the floor creaking beneath my weight. The intruder had vanished, leaving only the hollow air of betrayal behind. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. So it begins, I whispered to myself, the words curling in the stillness. He's willing to steal in the dead of night. Then I must be willing to fight in the light of day. The morning light slipped through the blinds in narrow streaks, painting the study in muted gold. The folder I had locked away was gone. No trace of it, just the faint smell of disturbed paper and the unsettling quiet of a house no longer entirely mine. Anger boiled under the surface, but I swallowed it down. Rage would only cloud my judgment. This wasn't just theft, it was war. And the enemy was my own blood. Breakfast tasted like cardboard, though I barely touched it. My son's threat from the night before clung to me. He wasn't waiting for time to work against me. He was already taking bold steps. That missing folder meant only one thing. He was tightening his grip, building his own version of the truth. And I knew the lies were coming. By the afternoon, they arrived. A family gathering, arranged as if casual. Though it had all the marks of a staged ambush, Trenton stood tall in the living room, papers in hand. His voice carried a strange, rehearsed calm. Dad's been struggling, he said, the words sharp enough to cut. He held up printed charts, medical notes I had never seen, suggesting I'd shown early signs of dementia. His claim? That I had forged the financial documents myself? Confused and paranoid. The whispers stung worse than a blade. My daughters-in-law shifted uncomfortably, one murmuring, "Maybe we should consider—" The phrase trailed, but its implication landed. Doubt spread like poison through the room. The humiliation burned, but I kept my face still, letting silence do the work of dignity. Then came the cruelest twist. He spoke of the grandchildren. Dad's paranoia is dangerous, Trenton insisted, his eyes flicking toward the little ones playing in the corner. What if he forgets the stove? What if he lashes out? He spun his web with precision, painting me as a threat, not a father, watching my own children hesitate, unsure of who to believe, nearly crushed me. But a quiet ember of strength refused to die. That night, I sat across from an old friend in a quiet diner. The coffee was stale, the lights dim, but the resolve I carried burned bright. I won't let this slander stand, I said, low but steady. My friend nodded, sliding a small recorder across the table. Then start collecting proof. Fight fire with fire. I left with steel in my spine. He thought he could twist the truth, but I knew his arrogance would betray him. Hours later, an envelope slipped under my door, changed everything. No note, no sender. Inside, a photograph. Trenton, seated with a lawyer, documents spread wide. Evidence not of my instability, but of his conspiracy. Someone wanted me to see this, to know the plot was bigger than I imagined. Shock froze me, suspicion gnawed at me. Who had given me this lifeline, and why? The lies around me were suffocating. But one thing rang clear, the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When I called the family together, the air in the house turned heavier than lead. Chairs scraped across the hardwood floor as each one of them took their place at the long dining table. No one dared look at me directly, not even the younger ones who usually sought my approval. Suspicion clung to the walls, thick and suffocating. The photograph in my pocket burned like a hidden weapon, and I knew the time had come to use it. I cleared my throat, steady but firm. We need to talk about what's been happening, I said. Eyes shifted, some toward Trenton, others down at the polished table. He leaned back in his chair with a smug confidence, as if daring me to speak. I pulled the photo from my pocket and laid it flat for everyone to see. This, I said, was slipped under my door last night. It shows Trenton meeting with a lawyer in secret. You tell me. Son, what exactly were you planning? The reaction was instant. Gasps, whispers, the shifting of uneasy bodies. Trenton shot forward in his chair, voice raised and sharp. This is ridiculous. You're chasing shadows. Father, these are nothing but wild conspiracy theories from a man losing his grip. The room fractured like glass under pressure. Some nodded nervously toward Trenton, clinging to his certainty. Others looked at me with doubt, with something like guilt flickering in their eyes. My silence cut deeper than his yelling. Before the storm could settle, another voice rose, timid but clear. Rowena Bly, who had sat quietly at the far corner all evening, finally spoke. I saw him, she whispered, eyes fixed on the photo. I saw Trenton with that lawyer. I didn't want to get involved. But it's the truth. The words landed like thunder. Chairs shifted violently. All eyes turned toward her. Trenton's face drained of color before twisting in rage. You're lying, he barked. You've always taken his side. You'd say anything to protect him? Rowena's hands trembled, but her voice held steady. No, I saw it, and I can't stay silent anymore. The table erupted. Voices clashed. Arguments overlapped. A chaos of loyalty and betrayal spilling into the open. Some of my children stared at me with shame. Others at Trenton with suspicion. For the first time, his control slipped. I took a slow breath and let my voice cut through the noise. For decades, I carried this family. I bled for it, sacrificed for it. And now you question my mind, my honor, my very place among you? If you want to tear this family apart, let it be with the truth, not with lies. For a moment, silence followed, heads bowed, and some looked as though they were beginning to waver. I saw doubt spreading like cracks in Trenton's armor. But my eldest son, cornered, did not fold. He rose suddenly, fists clenched, his voice trembling with fury. Enough! If you want war, Father, then you'll have it. I'll end this once and for all, in court. We'll see who the law believes. I looked up at him. Calm, unshaken. Then let the truth speak in court. He slammed his hand against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Then stormed out of the room. The door shook on its hinges as it slammed shut behind him, leaving the rest of the family frozen in shock. I remained seated, hands steady on the table, though my heart thundered inside. The storm had broken. But the war had only begun. The war has just begun, I whispered to myself, low enough that only I could hear. After the door slammed behind Trenton, sound seemed to drain out of the house as if someone had opened a vent to the night. People shuffled their feet, avoided each other's eyes, gathered coats without asking where the hangers were, and left in clumps of 2 or 3. The kitchen still smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. The table still held a half-eaten pecan pie, but the place felt emptied of warmth. I stacked plates with the slow care of a man moving through a church after service, afraid to make noise in case the sanctuary broke. When the last car's headlights slid off the blinds, I stood in my own dining room and listened to the refrigerator hum. It sounded like a machine breathing for a patient who'd slipped too far. Sleep didn't come. I stretched out on the sofa with a throw over my legs and stared at the ceiling fan turning its tired circles. The photo lay on the coffee table. The lawyer's face caught mid-word, Trenton's profile sharp as a blade. The house creaked as it always did when the air cooled, but each small sound carried a new meaning, as if shadows had learned to speak. By morning, exhaustion had settled behind my eyes, the kind that coffee doesn't touch. Phones are efficient messengers of cowardice. Before sunrise, a text from a nephew. Rough night, maybe we should take a breather. Then a sister-in-law. Praying for peace. This fighting can't be good for anyone. No mention of the meeting with the lawyer. No mention of the forged papers. Just soft cotton words to wrap around a hard refusal to take sides. Others stayed silent altogether. The silence saying, enough. By noon, 2 more messages arrived. Polite as casserole dishes left on a doorstep, telling me they loved me, but maybe it was time to step back and let the kids handle things. Kids. Most of them pushing 50. It hurt. Not the sharp kind that makes you curse and shake your hand, but the dull, spreading kind that works its way into bone. Yet there was clarity in it, too. Like cold water rinsing smoke from the air, people reveal themselves in the awkward hour. Some lean in, some lean away. Those who leaned away had been leaning for a long time. I realized I just hadn't wanted to see it. I walked the backyard to steady myself. The St. Augustine grass cool under shoes. The live oak lifting a lacework of branches into a sky rinsed clean by last night's storm. My wife planted that oak when the youngest was born. It had survived droughts, freezes, hurricanes that teased roofs from houses. I laid a palm against the ridged bark and felt steadier for it. She would have told me to breathe, to keep records, to speak only when necessary, and then in complete sentences. She used to say that truth needed patience more than it needed volume. Around mid-afternoon, the phone rang with an unknown number. I almost let it go, then answered, a voice I knew but hadn't heard from since Christmas came through in a hush. "It's Edna," she said, the cousin who'd sat by the window at the meeting, eyes darting like a bird's. "I shouldn't be calling." She paused as if measuring courage. "I don't trust him anymore. Lem, people at church have been talking. Something about a shortfall in the youth fund he managed last year, and him paying it back quietly. Folks are asking where it went in the first place." The wind lifted a corner of the photo on the coffee table. "Thank you," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't speak last night," she whispered. "He scares people with that voice. Yours scares them too. In a different way. It makes them feel seen." When we hung up, I sat at my wife's desk in the small room that still smelled faintly of lavender oil. On the bulletin board, she had pinned a quote written in her tidy script. "Steady wins the fight. Nobody sees." I opened a fresh notebook and wrote the date. Then I wrote names, times, fragments of conversations. The page calmed me. A ledger of small truths can outlast a hurricane of lies. Evening light lay thin across the floorboards when the next call came. This time the name displayed, Jonah Pierce, Trenton's business partner at the real estate firm. We were cordial acquaintances, never close. He spoke like a man stepping carefully around broken glass. "Mr. Riker," he said, "I would prefer not to be calling you." but I can't keep quiet. I've been uncomfortable for a while. After what happened last night, I think you should see something. My grip tightened on the handset. What is it you think I should see? Documents, he said, barely above a whisper. Internal memos, transaction ledgers. It's complicated, but the gist is simple. Money moved where it shouldn't. Approval stamped with names that shouldn't have been there. Some relate to properties under your trust. He told me he had your blessing. Then he said it was a family matter, and to stay out. You have copies? I do, he said, and I made them because I refuse to go down with him if this ship takes water. Can we meet? Not at my office. Somewhere neutral. We set a time for the following afternoon. He suggested a small coffee shop near the medical center, crowded enough to be inconspicuous, quiet enough for papers to be reviewed. I wrote the time in the notebook and closed it gently, as if the act of closing might keep the fragile agreement intact. After I hung up, the house felt less empty, not warm, not yet, but occupied by purpose. I brewed tea and carried it to the study, sliding open the bottom drawer to check on the few documents Trenton hadn't stolen. My hands moved with the deliberate calm of a craftsman. Copies went into a fireproof pouch. A second set went into the floor, safe behind the rug, where the board still lifted with that stubborn squeak. I imagined my wife standing in the doorway, arms folded, nodding. "You're doing fine," she would say. She never used many words when the truth could travel on a few. Night came with a quiet rain that freckled the driveway. The neighborhood settled into the comfortable hush of television murmurs and dogs being called in. I wrote my statement for the lawyer, just the facts. Arranged plain as lumber. The mind wants to wander in nights like these. To construct speeches and rehearse old hurts. The page disagreed. The page wanted verbs and dates. Close to midnight, the phone buzzed again, a message. Short and mean. From a number I recognized as one of Trenton's closest allies in the firm. "You're making a fool of yourself. Back off before you ruin what's left of your name." I put the phone face down and let the message rest between us. A minute later, another text arrived, this one from a niece who had fled the house in tears. "I'm sorry for earlier. He's not the man I thought. Be careful." There it was, the first sliver of light under a locked door. Not enough to see the whole room, but enough to make out the shape of hope. Rumors moved fast in Houston, and by morning they would move faster. His facade had always been a performance. The generous son, the competent manager, the steady hand. Performances need an audience. An audience can start to drift. I turned off the lamps and let darkness have the room. In the quiet, memory rose of a birthday long ago. When my wife set a single candle in cornbread because money was tight and laughed when the wax ran down the side. "Make a wish that matters," she had said, back then. Wishes felt like birds you might actually catch. Tonight, the wish was simpler, not to win, but to keep the truth from being smothered. Morning would come with coffee and the long drive to that cafe. With it, maybe the first hard proof that this wasn't the rambling concern of an old man, but the outline of a crime. Maybe Jonah would lose his nerve. Maybe he would show up. Courage is a fickle visitor. But sometimes, it keeps its appointment. I closed the notebook, slid a pen through the spiral, and rested my hand on the cover, as if blessing a child before school. "If the truth is finally surfacing," I muttered, "I'll be ready to face it, head on." The days leading up to the legal fight felt like a storm cloud that never drifted away. Each morning began with the same ritual, sorting papers, checking the dates on documents, reviewing the statements I had copied and filed. The notebook where I had written every detail sat on my kitchen table. Its pages covered in my cramped handwriting. I didn't move quickly anymore, but my mind worked faster than it had in years. I wasn't just preparing for a courtroom, I was preparing for a reckoning. The envelope from the court arrived one gray morning. The letter inside was crisp, cold, and sharp in its intent. Trenton had filed a motion declaring me unfit to manage my estate. He accused me of confusion, forgetfulness, and paranoia. words designed to strip me of dignity. My chest tightened as I read each line. But there was no trembling in my hands. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was war. When word spread, the family couldn't pretend anymore. Some of them, who had whispered doubts before, looked horrified at the idea of dragging me into court. Others kept their distance, not wanting to choose sides too early. Yet, the betrayal cut the same. To watch my own son wield the law as a weapon against me was a wound no father should endure. And then came something unexpected. Clara Wynne, my neighbor for more than 30 years, walked into my kitchen one afternoon with a stack of papers. "I've seen enough, Lemuel," she said firmly. "He's been talking with bankers, and I overheard things I can't ignore." Alongside her was Silas Morrell, an old friend from church, carrying notes of his own. They gave me their full support, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel so alone. Word began to spread in the community, too. Whispers that maybe it wasn't the old man losing his mind, but the son losing his soul. I agreed to meet Trenton privately before the first hearing. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the hum of voices around us muffling our own. I told him calmly, "Lies have short legs. Son, they won't carry you far." His smirk faltered for just a moment, and I saw the cracks. He masked it with arrogance. But the fear was there. The court date was set. I walked out of that meeting with a strange calm, as though my path was finally clear. I wasn't going to be dragged into this trial as a victim. I would step into that courtroom as a man defending his honor, his life, and his legacy. In that courtroom, I whispered to myself that night, staring out the window into the Texas dark. The truth will finally be louder than his lies. The courthouse in downtown Houston was buzzing that morning, the kind of buzz that carried both curiosity and judgment. People I'd never met before filled the benches, whispering in low voices about the strange sight of a father dragged into court by his own son. The polished floors echoed with footsteps, the air heavy with tension. Sitting at my table, I felt the weight of 70 years pressing down on me. Never in all that time had I imagined my life would bring me here, facing my eldest boy, not in a living room or at a dinner table, but in front of a judge. Trenton walked in with the swagger of a man convinced he had already won. His suit was expensive, his smirk rehearsed, yet beneath that confident stride, I caught a flicker in his eyes, nervous energy, like a gambler who had bet everything on one final hand. The judge entered, and the room rose as one. When we sat again, the hush was so deep it seemed even the air held its breath. Trenton's lawyer spoke first. His words were sharp, designed to cut me down without ever raising his voice. He painted a picture of a confused old man, paranoid, slipping into dementia, dangerous to his own estate. Mr. Riker's advanced age, the lawyer declared, has left him vulnerable to delusions. This case is not about malice, but about protecting him from himself. Laughter, polite but cruel, rippled through one corner of the courtroom. My children, seated behind Trenton, shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. Then my lawyer rose. Linda Green was calm, steady, and clear. She didn't posture or sneer. Instead, she laid out the simple truth. This case isn't about age, it's about evidence. And when we finish, the truth will speak louder than assumptions. I wanted to believe her confidence, but part of me still trembled inside. When the cross-examination began, everything shifted. Trenton took the stand, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted high. At first, his answers rolled out smoothly, but Linda's questions grew tighter, each one a thread pulling at the fabric of his story. You stated your father signed these documents of his own free will. Were you present at the bank? Yes, Trenton said. Linda held up a record from the bank's security log. Because this shows you weren't there that day? The courtroom stirred. Trenton blinked rapidly. I must have forgotten the exact date. Another question, another slip. He contradicted himself on who prepared the papers. First, he claimed it was a lawyer. Then, He insisted it was a financial advisor. Whispers spread through the benches, the kind that sting like nettles. His voice grew louder, sharper, but the more he tried to cover his missteps, the more the cracks in his story showed. Watching him stumble, I felt a grim vindication. Years of quiet endurance, of biting my tongue while he humiliated me, were unraveling right here, under oath. Still, I kept my face composed. Inside, though, something burned bright, justice taking its first breath. And then came the moment no one expected. Linda called a surprise witness. A man I hadn't seen in years stepped into the room, Gregory Shaw. An old friend and once a business associate of Trenton's. Gasps filled the chamber. Gregory's voice was steady as he recounted what he had witnessed. Private meetings, underhanded deals, conversations where Trenton bragged about forging documents to seize my estate. The words landed like thunderclaps. Trenton's face drained of color. He sputtered, accused Gregory of lying. But the damage was done. The court saw his desperation. The judge's eyes narrowed, measuring the son who had stood so smugly only moments before. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, the judge rapped his gavel. The court will recess briefly before deliberation. My heart pounded as the reality sank in. The storm had broken wide open. Every humiliation, every whisper, every poisoned gesture had led here, and now the truth was no longer just mine to carry. It belonged to everyone in that room. Still, nothing was certain yet. A verdict loomed, and it would decide everything. As the gavel echoed once more, I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, whatever happens next, I've already reclaimed my voice. The gavel struck once, echoing through the hushed courtroom. Every breath in that room seemed to pause, suspended in the silence that followed. For weeks, I had lived with the weight of this trial, the whispers about my mind, the betrayal of my son. Now, at last, the moment of truth had arrived. The judge's voice was steady, but every word landed like thunder in my chest. He declared that Trenton's claims of my incompetence were false, unsupported by fact or law. The evidence of forgery, manipulation, and deceit spoke louder than his denials. And then came the words I had both dreaded and prayed for. My son was found responsible for fraud, coercion, and attempts to usurp my estate. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some of my family members covered their mouths. Others stared at the floor. As for me, the verdict didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing again after nearly drowning. Vindication and sorrow sat together in my chest, because no father ever dreams of hearing his son condemned. Trenton's face twisted in fury. His lawyer tried to calm him, but his arrogance couldn't stomach the blow. The judge continued, his words slicing clean. Trenton Riker is hereby stripped of all inheritance rights pertaining to his father's estate. The final nail in his scheme was hammered down in full view of the law. I sat taller as deputies moved toward him. He cursed under his breath, spat venom in my direction, and then was escorted out in handcuffs. My heart clenched, not from fear this time, but from the ache of watching my firstborn collapse under the weight of his own greed. Justice had been served, but at a cost neither of us could reclaim. When the courtroom emptied, the family lingered. Ellen approached me, eyes brimming with tears. Dad, I should have seen it. I should have believed you. Others followed, shame written across their faces, apologies fumbling from their lips. For the first time in years, I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, I never wanted your downfall, only your honesty. Some wept quietly. Others turned away, burdened by guilt. In that moment, I didn't crave their regret. I craved their understanding. Whether it came that day or years later was no longer my concern. As I walked towards the courthouse steps, strangers, neighbors, townsfolk, even people I barely knew, extended their hands. One man, an old friend of my late wife, gripped my palm and said, "You showed us silence is not weakness." I nodded, humbled, but inside I felt a fire burn steady. Dignity restored itself not in applause, but in the simple act of standing my ground. That night, I sat in my wife's old chair, the verdict still echoing in my head. The property, the estate, the inheritance. It was all intact. But I realized something deeper. Those things had never truly defined me. The true inheritance was never land or money. It was the lesson my life could give. Resilience in the face of betrayal, the strength to fight without losing yourself, and the courage to hold on to honor even when family turns away. Looking back, I see now that the wounds my son left will never fully heal, but I also see that they do not define me. My story is more than his treachery. It is a testimony that truth, though battered, will outlast deceit. As I stepped into the cool night air, I carried no riches in my hands, but something far greater in my heart: honor, dignity, peace, and that was enough.